Welcome to RPG PhD, where we imagine, improvise, and immerse. I'm Dr. Ben, and today we're talking about something absolutely foundational to every tabletop game you've ever played, whether you realize it or not. The social contract. Let me tell you a story. In a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, a group had agreed explicitly to play cooperatively. No PvP, no sabotage. But one player kept stealing from party members, disrupting plans, and acting on their own without consulting the group. The Dungeon Master talked to them privately, tried to course correct, but the behavior continued. Eventually, it reached a breaking point when that player's actions nearly wrecked the party's efforts mid-session. Now, what actually went wrong here? Was it just bad behavior? Or was it a deeper breakdown of trust, of shared expectations, of the unspoken rules that make a game work? That's what we're diving into today. In political theory, a social contract is an agreement among individuals to form a society and live by shared rules. In tabletop role-playing games, it's the informal understanding about how we treat each other at the table, what kind of story we're telling, what behavior is acceptable, and what kind of experience we want to have together. This episode explores how that idea, social contract theory, applies to tabletop role-playing games. From its philosophical roots in Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, to its evolution in modern RPG theory and play culture, we'll examine how every game session is shaped by this invisible agreement. We'll look at how designers embed social contracts into systems, how game masters reinforce or reinterpret them, and how players navigate issues like tone, agency, and consent through this shared understanding. The term social contract comes from political philosophy, where it gained prominence in the 17th and 18th centuries through thinkers like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. At its core, the theory describes a real or imagined agreement among individuals, or between the people and a governing authority, defining mutual rights, responsibilities, and the rules of social life. These philosophers speculated about a pre-societal state of nature where no laws or governments existed, and asked why people would willingly form organized communities. Hobbes argued that life in this natural state would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, a perpetual conflict of all against all. To escape this chaos, individuals would consent to give up some personal freedoms in exchange for order, entrusting authority to a sovereign who ensures compliance with shared rules. Locke and Rousseau offered variations. Locke emphasized natural rights and the consent of the governed, while Rousseau focused on collective will and democratic sovereignty. Still, they all viewed society as rooted in a basic agreement of cooperation. The essential components of classical social contract theory are consent, mutual obligation, and authority. People agree explicitly or implicitly to abide by certain norms for the benefit of all, and these norms are maintained by a shared system of power. Of course, the concept has its critics. One common challenge is that a contract without an enforcing authority can be meaningless. Just agreeing isn't enough if no one ensures the agreement is upheld. This tension becomes especially relevant in tabletop role-playing games, where there's no external enforcer beyond the group itself. In that sense, tabletop role-playing games are one of the purest examples of a self-governed social contract. So how did a concept from political philosophy end up influencing tabletop role-playing game design? In role-playing games, the term social contract is used more metaphorically, but it serves an important function. Designers and theorists quickly realized that everything that happens at the table is a social activity, and that the dynamics between players significantly shape the game itself. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, especially in the indie design scene and online spaces, social contract was being used to describe the highest level of shared understanding within a playgroup. Ron Edwards introduced the concept as the outermost layer of his influential big model of role-playing. In this framework, the social contract is the context that surrounds and informs everything else, from the chosen game system and fiction down to moment-to-moment interactions between players. Before a single die hits the table, the group already operates under an agreement. spoken or unspoken, about how they intend to play together. This can include broad assumptions like, we're here to have fun and respect each other, and we'll follow the game's core rules, as well as more specific expectations like, the game master will act as a fair referee, or players won't sabotage each other's enjoyment. Edward's big model emphasizes that every group has a social contract, whether they name it or not. It defines how the players relate to one another as people, and in doing so lays the groundwork for the shared imaginary space they create through play. Community design theorists have been talking about these unspoken agreements for decades. For example, one writer noted that a social contract in RPGs essentially boils down to how players treat each other and agree to play, and it underlies whether a game experience will be fun or dysfunctional. They emphasize that honest communication is the fundamental key to a working social contract and fun gaming. Most groups develop this understanding naturally over time. Often, we don't have to talk about it, we just assume everyone knows what to do. But just as in society, assuming everyone's on the same page can be risky. Misunderstandings about the game's purpose or playstyle can cause a campaign to fizzle out or lead to conflict. Therefore, many RPG theorists and game master advocates discussing the social contract openly, especially at the start of a campaign, use a practice now commonly called a session zero. Importantly, the role-playing game social contract isn't backed by any formal authority. It's maintained by social pressure, trust, and the mutual desire to keep playing together. If someone violates the group's expectations badly enough, the only sovereign response available might be group intervention, or ultimately asking a person to leave the game. The absence of an external enforcer led one commentator to argue that a gaming group isn't literally a contract in the Hobbesian sense, since for a contract to work, it needs an authority to uphold it, which gaming groups lack. However, the utility of the concept for gamers lies not in strict analogies to government, but in highlighting that playing a tabletop role-playing game is entering a shared social space with its own rules and norms. In effect, the players themselves collectively are the authority that sustains the contract. Everyone at the table consents to uphold it, or the game falls apart. As we'll explore, many modern game designers and community tools are geared toward making that implicit agreement more explicit and robust. Every gaming table has a social contract, but not every group spells it out. We can distinguish between implicit and explicit social contracts. An implicit contract is the unspoken etiquette and assumptions that players bring with them. This relies on general cultural norms and prior gaming experiences. For example, the tacit understanding that you shouldn't cheat, or that you shouldn't derail the game for no reason, even if no one explicitly said so. In longtime friend groups, much of the contract might remain implicit because everyone has similar expectations, or just knows how to behave. You might never formally say, don't flip the table when you roll badly, because it's obvious. Of course that's not okay. However, implicit contracts also cover more subtle expectations, like how strongly should everyone be committed to playing, or is it okay for players to split the party or PvP each other, which might not be obvious without discussing. By contrast, an explicit contract is when the group actively discusses and agrees on their expectations. This is often done during a session zero or a pre-game conversation where the group lays out ground rules. Explicit contracts have become more common with the wider dissemination of RPG advice and the introduction of conversation and calibration tools. More on those soon. As one Game Master Advice article defines it, an explicit contract involves clear discussion and affirmative consent by all parties about how the game will be run. Increasingly, role-playing game circles encourage making certain things explicit. What genre and tone are we going for? What themes are off limits? How will we handle scheduling and absences? Who brings snacks? Even seemingly mundane logistics can be part of the social contract. Many a group has unraveled because they never agreed on how to handle chronically late players, or hosting duties. A comprehensive social contract might cover things like the game system and rules being used, how rules decisions are made, majority vote or game master fiat, expected tone, gritty or gonzo, comedic or deadly serious, campaign length, attendance expectations, how to welcome new players or respectfully part ways with players, and so on. Modern discussions also explicitly include conversation/calibration or communication or content boundary tools as part of the contract. What sorts of tools will we use as a group? Are there topics we should avoid? Why make implicit things explicit? The benefit is avoiding mismatched assumptions and preventing group dysfunction. Problems often arise when players have different understandings of the unspoken rules. Perhaps one player thinks intra-party betrayal is fine. They backstab another character for dramatic effect, while another player feels utterly betrayed out of the game. If nobody talked about it, each feels the other broke the rules of the social contract, except those rules were never clearly agreed upon. Explicit discussion up front can reveal such disconnects. As one commenter put it, a lot of games fizzle out because only a couple people were actually into the premise or style being played, and it never really clicked for the whole group. Talking it through for even 15 minutes can uncover these issues and get everyone on the same page. Of course, groups don't have to formalize everything. That can become overkill or feel like hours of endless debate, which no one wants. But striking a balance by explicitly covering key points can save a lot of trouble later. The rise of structured guides, like the Same Page tool, underscores this idea. The Same Page tool is essentially a checklist of fundamental playstyle questions a group should agree on before starting a campaign. It prompts yes, no, or either or questions like, do we play to win, or is it not about win-lose? Are player characters expected to work together, or can they betray each other? Is the game master the sole authority, or can players describe aspects of the world? By collectively choosing the answers, a group makes their contract explicit. The premise is simple. Functional play depends on everyone playing the same game, and too often people assume their way is universal when in fact there are many ways to play. The tool doesn't magically fix disagreements, but it helps you clarify exactly what you will be playing. It's a way to calibrate expectations, essentially formalizing the social contract so all participants know what they're signing up for. It's noteworthy that implicit social contracts were the norm for many years in the hobby, but explicit contracts have gained traction, especially with newer generations of gamers and the influence of indie role-playing games. One author observes that historically, everyone comes to the table and simply vibes out the group and the game, perhaps only discussing game dynamics openly when a problem arises. But thanks to things like communication tools and certain game designs, explicit discussions are becoming more common. Still, explicit contracts are the minority in practice. Many groups run in unwritten rules until an issue forces them to talk. This is why articles and game masters increasingly advocate proactively, talking about this at your table more often. Ultimately, whether implicit or explicit, the social contract is about consent and understanding, everyone agreeing to the same general parameters of play. In the early days of tabletop role-playing, and particularly in the 1970s and 1980s, most gaming groups operated with implicit social contracts. Expectations about behavior, tone, and playstyle were largely unspoken and often shaped by shared background, in-group norms, or the limited number of systems and communities that were available. As a result, many veteran players and game masters, especially those who have been gaming for decades, may not see the need for explicitly stating a social contract at all. For them, it can feel redundant or even artificial to formalize something that was once just assumed. However, both gaming culture and social sensibilities have evolved significantly since those early days. The hobby is now more diverse, more inclusive, and more experimental, with a wider range of genres, tones, and player experiences. What was once unspoken now often benefits from being clearly articulated, not because players are more fragile, but because expectations are no longer guaranteed to be shared. As with any maturing medium, this shift reflects broader cultural changes in how we relate, communicate, and collaborate. Beyond just mechanical preferences, the social contract encompasses play culture, the shared attitudes and values that shape how players relate to each other. A crucial part of contemporary play culture is ensuring that everyone at the table feels comfortable, respected, and free to engage meaningfully in the game. This is where conversation tools and content calibration come into play. Structured methods that allow players to negotiate boundaries, tone, and expectations in real time. These tools are, in effect, formal extensions of the social contract, agreed upon ways to communicate about what kind of experience the group wants to create together. One of the most widely used tools is lines and veils. A line is a hard boundary, a topic that will not appear in the game at all. For example, a group might draw a line at graphic violence toward children or sexual assault. A veil, on the other hand, represents a soft boundary, content that may exist in the game world but will be handled off-screen with minimal detail. A common example is romantic or sexual content. It might happen between characters, but the scene fades to black rather than being played out in full. When players identify these limits during Session 0, they are actively shaping the social contract, clarifying what types of content are welcome and how sensitive material will be approached. This kind of calibration doesn't restrict storytelling, it enables it. By making boundaries explicit, players can engage more confidently, knowing their comfort and consent are being respected. These conversations reinforce the idea that everyone at the table is a co-author of the experience, not just of the fiction, but of the framework within which that fiction unfolds. Other tools can support this process as well. The X card, for example, allows any player to signal discomfort during play simply by tapping or holding up a card marked with an X. It's a quick, no explanation needed way to say, let's shift away from this. Similarly, Script Change offers a suite of media-inspired cues like pause, rewind, or fast forward to help players navigate intense moments with shared control. These tools, like the social contract itself, are only effective if everyone at the table agrees to honor them. They rely on good faith, communication, and the understanding that everyone's experience matters. As one community written guide notes, we all have our limits and boundaries. Lines and veils are ways to handle those boundaries in play. Including conversation and consent agreements as part of the social contract has a profound effect on play culture. It reinforces that player well-being and collaborative trust matter more than sticking rigidly to the narrative. If someone hits a personal boundary, the social agreement ensures that the group adjusts rather than pushing that player through distress. This creates a culture of trust and responsiveness. Players are often more willing to engage with emotionally rich or complex stories when they know there's a kind of conversational safety net, that they won't be forced to endure material that they find personally upsetting or difficult. By contrast, in groups without these shared understanding, a player might silently withdraw, disengage, or become upset, undermining the very trust that role-playing depends on. As Sarah Lynn Bowman puts it, players agree to a social contract of play within which the rules of social reality are temporarily changed. In other words, we enter a shared fiction together, but real-world values like empathy and respect don't disappear. In fact, they must be heightened because role-play often invites participants to explore emotionally vulnerable material. This is also where the concept of the alibi comes in, particularly in Nordic LARP theory. The alibi is an understanding among players that what happens in the fiction, no matter how dramatic or confrontational, it's not a personal attack, it's just part of the performance, part of the collaborative illusion. This is one of the most important functions of the social contract, to create the emotional and ethical boundary between character action and player experience. That boundary allows players to explore difficult topics while trusting that their real relationships at the table remain intact. In short, content calibration and clear communication are not side notes to role-playing. They're core components of a robust, functional social contract. For example, Monty Cook Games' Consent in Gaming is a free toolkit that provides a checklist of topics, from spiders to sexual content to torture to romance, for players to mark as green, yellow, red in terms of comfort. Using such a checklist at session 0 is a concrete act of social contracting around consent. It says, we as a group agree that red items will not appear, yellow items will be handled with care, and green items are welcome. This is a far cry from the early days of the hobby when the prevailing attitude was that the game master would just throw whatever at the players and they'd have to deal or leave. In traditional RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, the social contract was historically assumed, not stated. The dungeon master builds the world and runs the game while players control their characters and tackle challenges. The guiding ethos was simple. Follow the rules, respect the game master, and don't ruin the fun. Earlier editions rarely outline player expectations, instead focusing on dungeon master guidance. As one commentator notes, the model mirrored board games, play by the rules and be excellent to each other, with the game master as the narrative driver. Even Rule 0, the dungeon master has final say, relied on mutual trust, not absolute power. The GM's authority is based upon the implicit allowance of the players. Today, that once unspoken contract is increasingly formalized. Session 0's tone discussions and conversation tools are more common, and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in 2020 offers guidance for setting expectations. Organized play like Adventurers League often includes official codes of conduct. In essence, Dungeons & Dragons' evolving social contract reflects a broader shift towards explicit communication and group consensus. What was once assumed is now discussed, ensuring everyone plays the same game. Or, as Will Wheaton famously put it, don't be a dick. Apocalypse World redefined role-playing game social contracts by making expectations explicit. Instead of relying on tradition or assumed norms, it clearly outlines the roles of the MC, the Master of Ceremonies, and players. The rules enforce shared narrative authority. Players accept that if you do it, you do it, while the MC adheres to principles like play to find out what happens and be a fan of the characters. This structure forms a built-in social contract of trust, consent, and collaboration. From the first session, players co-create the setting and relationships, embedding collaboration into character creation. The game encourages open dialogue around content boundaries, even if not labeled as conversation tools, reinforcing that player comfort comes first. It also promotes equitable play, discouraging spotlight hogging and treating the MC moves as proposals, validated through group buy-in. This reflects the Lumpley principle. The system is what the group agrees it is. The Powered by the Apocalypse lineage carries this forward. Games like Monster Hearts and Urban Shadows build Session 0, tone, setting, and collaborative world building into their core. The Powered by the Apocalypse model prioritizes conversation as the true medium of play, with mechanics supporting that dialogue. Ultimately, Apocalypse World establishes a clear social contract. We're here to tell bold stories together, but we'll do it with mutual care. That ethos helps shape a more conscious, player-driven RPG culture. Role-playing games vary widely in how they establish and express social contracts. While Dungeons & Dragons, Apocalypse World, and Blades in the Dark reflect traditional, narrative, and structured collaborative models respectively, many other games bring their own approach to the table. Fate Core, for example, embeds its contract in campaign creation. Players collaboratively define setting, tone, and shared aspects like revolution in Steam City. These elements shape both narrative and mechanics, ensuring buy-in and shared direction. Though not always explicit in the core rules, Fate's community emphasizes Session 0 discussions to align expectations and boundaries. The Smallville RPG takes a relational approach. Before play, players build a web of connections linking player characters to each other and to NPCs, complete with assigned values. This relationship map isn't just backstory, it's a declaration of the game's focus. Emotional conflict, not combat. The social contract here makes clear that dramatic character development takes precedence over tactics. Even classic systems like Call of Cthulhu carry genre-driven contracts. The expectation is clear. Characters face madness, loss, and death. When a keeper emphasizes investigation and existential dread, they're reaffirming the game's tone. A player focused on heroics or humor risks clashing with the shared narrative frame. Indie games often make these contracts explicit. Apocalypse World calls for conversations about content and comfort. Dread uses a Jenga tower to link gameplay to rising tension and fatal stakes, making consent to danger a mechanical and emotional agreement. Paranoia flips the script, building its absurd, PvP-friendly social contract into every rule with full player buy-in. Across all these examples, the social contract does more than guide etiquette. It shapes narrative tone, emotional range, and collaborative trust. Whether spelled out through mechanics or inferred through genre, every role-playing game relies on a shared understanding of how the group agrees to play. The best games are the ones where those expectations are made clear and then honored. The social contract in role-playing games plays a defining role in shaping player agency, group consent, tone, calibration, and narrative flow. Player agency, the ability to make meaningful choices that impact the story, relies on agreed boundaries of control. If a contract leans too heavily toward game master authority, players may feel railroaded. If too open-ended, narrative chaos or confusion may result. Striking the right balance might be essential. Players need to know what they control, usually their character, and where the game master's authority begins, the world, the stakes, and the non-player character reactions. Games like Blades in the Dark and Apocalypse World explicitly empower players as co-authors, granting them narrative input and decision-making power while clearly defining the limits of game master control. For example, it makes clear that the MC can only restrict agency through known mechanics or logical consequences, not arbitrary fiat. It also encourages the MC to ask players provocative questions like, what are you afraid might happen? Giving them authorship over their fears, motivations, and parts of the setting itself. In contrast, more traditional games like Dungeons & Dragons often presume a narrower scope of agency. Players act, the GM adjudicates. But even here, if expectations aren't clarified, say a dungeon master dictates a character's actions or a player oversteps into world narration, conflict can emerge. Many rules disputes are really social contract disagreements in disguise. Ultimately, a well-structured social contract ensures that everyone knows who controls what, agrees to those boundaries, and feels empowered within those constraints. Whether you're surrendering narrative control to a dice roll or shaping the world through character backstory, the key is mutual consent and clarity. Consent in tabletop role-playing games means that all participants, players and game master, agree to the game's content, tone, and direction, broadly during session 0 and in the moment. It's a cornerstone of the social contract. For example, a Blades in the Dark group may agree to gritty crime and ghosts, but draw clear lines against themes like torture or sexual violence. Those boundaries become part of the agreement, and conversation or consent tools allow players to adjust or withdraw consent as needed, no questions asked. Consent also applies to character agency. Some groups ban player versus player unless both players agree, while others embrace it. But the key is explicit agreement. Without consent mechanisms, unexpected content can cause discomfort or can derail the story because of a lack of trust. With them, moments of discomfort can be redirected, keeping the narrative collaborative for everyone involved. Tone is a crucial but often overlooked part of the social contract. If some players want gritty drama and others play for laughs, the disconnect can derail the experience. Calibrating tone, agreeing on the mood and style of the game, helps ensure everyone is on the same narrative page. Many games now recommend discussing tone in session 0. Are we going for epic heroism, grim horror, or pulpy fun? This agreement shapes character choices, player behavior, and the game master's prep. Tools like script change allow mid-game tone adjustments, letting players say pause or tone down without judgment. Even informal signals like a raised eyebrow reflect an active social contract at work. A player breaking agreed tone can be reminded respectfully, but only if expectations were clearly set. Inconsistent tone often leads to conflict, so aligning early and revisiting tone as needed helps the game stay coherent and enjoyable for all. Emergent narrative, the unfolding story created through play, depends heavily on the group's social contract. When players and game masters align on tone, genre, and creative goals, the story tends to resonate. Misalignment leads to disjointed plots or tension, often stemming from mismatched expectations rather than bad behavior. For instance, a group agreeing to explore serious character growth will generate different stories than one focused on humor and action. These creative agendas, whether dramatic, tactical, or comedic, must be mutually understood. Tools like Session Zero help define these expectations, preventing frustration down the line. Player agency and trust also shape narrative quality. In groups with strong social contracts, players feel safe making bold choices like dramatic sacrifices or betrayals because they trust others to handle it respectfully. Without that trust, those moments either don't happen or can, at worst, cause conflict. Ultimately, the social contract shapes how stories are told, who tells them, and whether everyone feels satisfied with the journey. A shared understanding allows emergent narrative to thrive, organic, surprising, and deeply collaborative. Also, the social contract is not static. It can evolve. Groups often amend their contract as they learn what works or if membership changes. Maybe initially PvP wasn't allowed, but later everyone agrees that a little intra-party conflict would spice things up, so they update the contract. What's important is that it's discussed rather than unilaterally acted on. As one author eloquently said, games don't exist on their own. They are defined by and rest upon the agreement of the people at the table. That agreement can be amended, rescinded, or added to at any time. You just have to speak up. In other words, the story is in our hands collectively. If you want to shift course, we talk and agree. That's the power of the social contract. It's the bedrock of collaborative creativity, ensuring everyone has a say in the experience we build together. Game designers codify these agreements through mechanics and guidance, whether it's how a system handles character agency, tone, calibration, or session pacing. For game masters, understanding these contracts isn't just about keeping the peace, it's about knowing how to frame the game so players feel empowered, respected, and creatively engaged. So let's take a look at the way social contract theory shapes role-playing game design and gameplay. One of the first areas where this theory applies is onboarding and access. Who gets invited into a game and how they are welcomed or excluded reflects an unspoken or sometimes formalized social agreement. Having a session zero, using lines and veils, and calibration and conversation tools help codify the idea that everyone at the table matters. Games like Monster Hearts makes this explicit from the start, framing consent and tone as foundational elements of play before character sheets are even filled out. Authority distribution is another critical area. Traditional systems like D&D often place narrative control in the hands of the dungeon master, while story-forward games like Fate, Apocalypse World, or Microscope distribute authorship more evenly. These decisions are not just mechanical, they are philosophical, forming the backbone of how players and game masters co-create fiction. In Microscope, for instance, players are forbidden from discussing events chronologically, forcing collaboration without hierarchy. This design enforces a social contract of shared narrative ownership, and it deeply affects how players engage with the story. At the same time, table culture, how players behave in and out of character, depends heavily on group norms and system cues. Is PvP allowed? Is power gaming frowned upon? Games like Paranoia embrace deception and betrayal, encoding those behaviors as part of the game's fun, while others expect cooperation and penalize metagaming. These are all forms of social contract, and systems that include guidance for tone and behavior help players understand what's in bounds. Every system implies a worldview through what it rewards or punishes. Call of Cthulhu, for example, delivers madness as the price for curiosity. Players are expected to accept that horror outcomes are unavoidable. In contrast, D&D often offers heroic fantasy in which danger is thrilling but ultimately conquerable. These systems create different moral universes, and when players show up expecting one tone and get another, conflict can arise. That's why consent to genre and tone is so vital to social contract formation. Games like Bluebeard's Bride and Trophy Dark align tone and mechanics so tightly that violating one undermines the entire experience. Even how failure is handled reflects a group's social contract. Some systems allow characters to die easily, while others buffer players from harsh consequences. Forged in the Dark games allow players to resist outcomes and turn failure into narrative twists, reinforcing a social agreement that risk is part of the fun, but also manageable. House rules and homebrewing live squarely in the realm of negotiated social contracts. Some games invite hacking, Dungeon World, while others operate under the assumption that rules are to be used as written. Whether or not a game master has the authority to override rules, so-called Rule Zero, is a clause in the social contract that must be understood and agreed upon. Over time, how well a group maintains that contract affects campaign longevity. Burnout, spotlight imbalance, or tone drift can erode trust, which is why systems like Thirsty Sword Lesbians and Dungeon World include mechanics for tracking character goals, emotional arcs, or evolving group dynamics. These mechanics act as scaffolding to help groups periodically recalibrate and continue playing together enjoyably. Taken together, these examples show how social contract theory isn't just an abstract concept. It has tangible implications for how games are written, run, and experienced. By understanding and designing with social contracts in mind, both game creators and game masters can build systems and stories that foster better collaboration, clearer expectations, and more meaningful play. Whether you're working on a gritty sandbox, a romantic melodrama, or a grim horror one-shot, the social contract you're asking players to enter into should be as carefully considered as the rules themselves. Role-playing games are, at their heart, social endeavors, and social contract theory provides a useful lens to understand how these games function and flourish. Just as citizens form a society by agreeing on basic principles of cooperation, players and game masters form a cohesive game by agreeing, implicitly or explicitly, on how they will cooperate in creating fiction. From the lofty ideals of Hobbes and Locke to the gaming table on a Friday night, the core idea is the same. We give up a little freedom and accept some rules in exchange for the benefits of group play: safety, fun, story, and friendship. In role-playing games, the social contract might be as simple as, we're here to have fun, let's all be cool to each other, or as detailed as a multi-point document covering tone, genre, taboos, and contingency plans. There is no one correct form. It varies by group and game. What matters is that everyone in the group has a shared understanding of expectations. When that understanding is strong, games run smoother. Players trust the game master, and vice versa. Conflicts are rarer or resolved calmly, and the creative energy goes into the game's story rather than out-of-game drama. When the understanding is lacking, you get the classic issues: rule arguments, hurt feelings, one player dominating or another disengaging, campaigns dissolving unexpectedly. It all comes back to communication and consent. As we saw, explicit discussion is often the remedy. More talking before and during play about what we want out of this game leads to a better experience for all. Through examples like D&D, we saw a case where the social contract was long implicit, yet it was always there, the glue holding the group together. D&D's modern evolution embraces making some of it explicit. Session 0, Conduct Guidelines, showing the mainstream hobby's recognition that yes, there is a table contract and we should pay attention to it. In Apocalypse World and Blades in the Dark, we saw how game design itself can shape the social contract, encouraging collaboration, sharing narrative duties, and requiring buy-in to certain play styles. These games demonstrate that when rules align with a clear social contract, for example, we're all co-authors, or we agree to play to find out, not predetermine outcomes, the result can be magical. Stories that surprise and delight, with everyone feeling invested. They also show that even innovative mechanics rely on a foundation of trust. The rules can guide, but it's the people who must agree to follow that guidance in good faith. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the idea of the social contract in tabletop role-playing games. In collaborative storytelling, the tale truly is only as strong as the trust at the table, and the social contract is what fosters that trust. It shapes whether a player feels safe making bold, vulnerable choices, whether a game master feels empowered to improvise, and whether a group can navigate twists, failures, and triumphs without fracturing. Like the saying goes, role-playing games live in the space between the minds of the people at the table. That shared imaginative space is shaped, guided, and sustained by the social contract. When we take time to define, honor, and revisit that agreement, whether through Session 0 conversations, rules expectations, or tone calibration, we're not just organizing a game night, we're forging a creative pact between friends. So let me know in the comments below, how do you handle social contracts at your table? Do you use Session 0? Have you ever had a time when the contract broke down? I'd love to hear your stories, the tools that you use, and your takeaways. If you found this discussion helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and helps the conversation going. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.